line. Over there, over there. Send the word over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. The drums coming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer. Send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over, over there, over there, over there. Send the word over.
Hey everybody, this is Joshua Littrell. Thank you for joining us here on the Honor Across Arms podcast. Today I have the distinct pleasure to introduce you all to Masa Kenney. Masa, how are you doing today?
Doing wonderful. Wonderful. How are y'all doing?
Oh, doing great. Masa, if you don't mind, give our listeners a little education on where you're at geographically in this country today.
I am right now in Athens, Georgia. I'm sitting outside a tire discount store getting some front tires replaced, and you're on the speakerphone, so it might get a little noisy now and then.
Nice. So you got the old classic city that you're at today.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. We've had some really great podcasts over the last few weeks, and this Honor Across Arms is really about uplifting our community and sharing our stories of service to our listeners. And we've had some great stories, some really great men and women that have come on board, and I'm really excited about getting into who you are today and your service to this country, and just letting our listeners know a little bit about, Masa and who he is and what he did for the United States. So if you don't mind a little bit, tell us where you're from originally and then what branch of service you served in.
Well, I'm kind of from all over. I was born in Texas at a really young age, moved out to Guam, and I was there until about 11 years and moved to South Georgia, where my dad is from. So from that point on, I was raised in South Georgia, and from there after high school, went into service, and after that came back and went to the University of Georgia. So go Dogs.
Absolutely, go Dogs. So Masa, what branch did you serve?
I went into the U.S. Army, served as 11 Bravo Infantry.
Awesome. So we're going to come back to that, but before we get there, I want to know, do you remember anything about Guam at all?
Guam? Oh yeah. I don't. That was my playground. Anywhere on Guam, you're not more than 10 minutes from the beach, and it was pretty amazing. Like, that was for most of the 70s, and that was a very heavily occupied by the U.S. Air Force and Navy. They got several bases out there. It was quite interesting because they still had a lot of the World War II, some Japanese equipment out there, and there were old battlefields that we got to check out, and it was actually one of the places where they found one of the last remaining holdouts from the Japanese Army. As far as like 73, they found an old Japanese soldier who was still hiding out in the caves out there, still thinking the war was going on.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That is crazy, Masa. So
it is crazy.
What was that like, being on an American territory and as an American citizen in this kind of war zone in the 70s? It wasn't necessarily a direct war zone, but hey, that's a jumping spot, right?
Yeah, that's the most western point U.S. territory, and it is, probably, not as important as Hawaii, but it is super important as far as location when it comes to strategic interest. So, most of my friends had parents serving, and so. It was just, it was, my mom was full-blooded Japanese, and, my dad's from Georgia, so I was just in the middle of both cultures out there, basically.
Boy, I think, to be honest with you, you may be the best mix of what two cultures could be in the entire world, man. Japanese
Well, I
culture
appreciate
is,
that.
yeah, absolutely. Japanese culture is unbelievable. And, I love me some South Georgia people too. So I think you got the best of both
Yeah.
worlds.
Yeah, me too, man. I appreciate that.
Well, it's a real honor to have you on this podcast today. As we talk about Guam specifically. There, when you were a child growing up, I just went to D.C. for a buddy of mine's retirement, and I'll never forget. He's doing his retirement speech, and Wags and I went to tech school together 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and he gets up and he starts his speech with, and I owe all this last 20 years to Airman Arnold. Airman Arnold was a kid that was sitting next to him in tech school who, when the orders came out, Arnold had Guam, and he was terrified of it. He was a kid, I think he was from Georgia or Tennessee, like that, something like that. And
Yeah.
Wags had orders to Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, right? So they're sitting beside each other, and Arnold's basically in tears. Like, I don't want to go to Guam. I don't know anything about it. And he's terrified. And Wags is sitting next to him, and he says, "I'll trade with you, man. I hate to see you, that beat up about it." So Arnold trades Guam with Wags for dang Shaw, South Carolina, and Wags had an amazing career after that. Wags went from Guam to Italy to Turkey. He's been all over to California, and Arnold went to South Carolina. So he starts his retirement speech with, "I owe all this to Airman Arnold, giving me Guam Air Force Base."
Oh man. Yeah. Oh, Aaron should have stuck with Guam because I'm telling you, it was quite a treat. Really, I had no idea how lucky I was to, really just be out there and experiencing the whole thing. I mean, it was it was almost primitive, back then. Just the whole mindset of the culture and development. I think back then there was maybe just two resort hotels on the whole island.
Wow.
And it was, a lot of it was just virgin territory and just wildlife and everything out there.
So, Masa, was it much developed at all then? Were there a lot of cars or stuff on Guam? Because I mean, that's
Well,
a long ways away.
yeah. Well, the thing is, like back then, there were because of all the military bases. There wasn't a lot. There wasn't like a lot of traffic hardly anywhere. But seeing as how that was the midpoint, that's when the Japanese started doing a lot of imports. So there were a lot of, probably more Japanese cars there than there were
Sure.
American cars.
Sure.
So yeah, it wasn't heavily developed either. I mean, there were of course, the structures and some tourist spots, stuff like that. But as far from what I know now, it's a lot more heavily developed, and it's a big tourist town now.
Well, I hate to ask this, but have you been back since you were a child?
No, I am not. I would like to go back because I still keep up with a friend or two out there, and I don't know. I mean, I haven't necessarily had a reason to go back, but just to go back and visit, where you grew up from I think it'd be really neat to see all the
Well,
changes that have
I'll tell
happened.
you what, Masa, why don't we open that up to our listeners here on this Honor Across Arms podcast, that if they want to go ahead and sponsor a trip, we'd be happy to tag along with you and the sponsoree who would sponsor the trip. And, I've definitely got to come along on that to get back to Guam, because we got to document that when we go, So as our listeners are listening, if anybody's out there willing to sponsor a trip, we're happy to travel along with you. I'd be happy to document. Masa's going to be our tour guide, and you'll be the sponsoree. So please contact us when you can. Well, Masa, let's talk a little bit about you getting over here to South Georgia. So tell us about growing up in South Georgia. What was that like?
Well, coming from Guam, it was a little bit of culture shock. I'm not gonna lie.
I can only imagine.
Well, I mean, the thing is like when we got here, that was 82, 83. It was a small town in South Georgia, and still kind of stuck in the old ways, and we're coming in, me and my two brothers going to school, and we're definitely like the only Asian kids or half mixed Asian kids in the whole town. So we didn't know how to take them as much as they didn't know how to take us.
Sure.
But eventually we just assimilated and made great friends. There's a lot of great people down here in Georgia. So it was like I said, a little bit culture shock, but everything ended up loving it because it's home, and so I just it was a big change, but I love it. It's home for me.
Well, you talk about the culture shock. You talk about a change. Let's get into your military service. I bet going into the Army was a little easier for you, knowing your background, where you had come from, moving to essentially a different country, if you will, getting to know new people. I bet joining the Army was a pretty easy assimilation for you. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was kind of used to it, being around the military lifestyle on Guam, and I just kind of knew during my senior year in high school that I wanted to go in and serve. I mean, there are several different reasons why. One, I wanted to travel. I insisted on my first contract that I get stationed overseas in Europe. I wanted to, of course, have a way to pay for my college after I got out. So I opted for the college fund instead of the enlistment bonus, which they offer. And so I ended up, getting a good lump of money to pay for my tuition after I got out. So, and I chose the infantry because I just always loved playing, with guns and soldier doing the paintball thing when I was in high school, and just loved running around in the woods. So I kind of figured that was my main interest in the military.
Wow. I mean, that's absolutely phenomenal. So let's talk about that military service now. Let's get into our Honor Across Arms podcast. Since our listeners understand a little bit more about Masa Kenney, tell us about, joining the Army, and you were infantry, is that correct?
Correct.
And where did you do your initial training at?
Oh, Fort Benning. It's home in the infantry. That's where all your 11 Bravos go for boot camp. And,
so you got to go a whole long ways away from home here, right back to Georgia at Fort Benning, right?
Well, yeah. Well, no, so I went to boot camp straight out of high school. It was just 2 hours north of where I was in South Georgia. So just straight from there. And then I got sent overseas to where my first station was.
What was that first station, Masa?
First station was 8th Infantry Division in Mainz, Germany. Just south of Wiesbaden, and right across the Rhine River there. So Wiesbaden is a big Air Force base, pretty well known in Germany, and that's where they send all the POWs and any major like hospital medical work that needs to be done.
Right.
That's where a lot of them are sent.
Now, from what I understand, that's some really beautiful country over there. And we flew into Ramstein Air Base when we were coming back from the desert for Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003.
Right.
And that was beautiful, beautiful. Now, is it the same where you were stationed at?
Yeah. It's pretty similar country out there. I mean, they got really, to me, southern Germany, Bavaria is where to me, the most beautiful part because it's right by the Alps. It's the Bavarian Alps running through there. So that's where you have all this beautiful mountain country. We were located probably about 100 miles north of that. My first duty station was, and so I went from going right there by the Rhine River to going to vacation down south a couple times.